All right, let's dive into some pretty interesting stuff today. Um, you sent in some audio, and it sounds like it's all about giving guys advice on attracting women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I got to say, some of it's, well, it's definitely thought-provoking. We're going to try to unpack some of the techniques and thought processes, but of course, we're not here to endorse anything.
Right, definitely. Think of it more like we're exploring a different perspective on how people communicate.
Okay.
This speaker definitely has a very particular view on social dynamics.
Yeah, you could even say a controversial view.
Exactly.
Okay, so to start off, he talks about this concept of framing and how important it is to control how your actions are perceived.
Mm-hmm. It's not just what you do, but how other people interpret it.
Right.
And he talks about establishing this meta frame. It's like this overarching lens that you want people to see all your interactions through.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. And the meta frame he's pushing for is pretty bold.
Yeah.
He's all about presenting yourself as the prize.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you act like you're the one in demand, women will subconsciously pick up on that.
He's tapping into that psychological idea that people value things that are scarce or hard to get.
Right.
But whether you can just intentionally create this persona and have it actually work the way he describes is debatable.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, can you just decide to be the prize?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? There's a
Yeah.
difference between confidence and arrogance,
Yeah.
authenticity and manipulation.
Right.
And he actually mentions that women might initially react to some of his tactics as like jerk behavior, but then he argues that they'll reframe it later as, high-skill flirting.
So, like, trick them into thinking it's attractive.
I mean, I guess that's his argument.
He has some really interesting examples of how this prize metaframe is supposed to play out. Like when a woman says, I have a boyfriend, he interprets that as her setting a boundary to avoid appearing too available.
Yeah, he sees it as almost like a social script.
Ah.
And what's interesting is he acknowledges that these boundaries might be rooted in social expectations or even a woman's own hesitation. But he suggests that the way to overcome those is to appeal to emotions rather than logic.
So bypass her reasoning.
Right.
Interesting. And then he talks about these attraction coups, which are basically unexpected responses that are meant to reframe the situation, often using humor or even absurdity. Like if a woman says, we're not sleeping together tonight, he suggests saying something like, ew, I wouldn't sleep in the same bed as you. I hardly even know you.
It's about shattering expectations and taking control of the interaction.
Okay. I mean, it's definitely unexpected. It could be disarming.
It could, but how effective it would be really depends on the situation and the people involved.
Right. Because that kind of line could easily come across as rude or insensitive if it's not delivered with the right tone and timing.
Definitely. And it's interesting because some of the other attraction coups he suggests rely heavily on humor, some even bordering on the ridiculous.
Give me an example.
Like he talks about responding to size really matters with, thank you for being honest. Most women can't be honest. Big breasts are important.
Wow. That's a lot. It's interesting, though, because he's using this unexpected, almost absurdist humor to deflect and then reassert his own frame.
Exactly. But the question is it perceived as playful and charming or just arrogant and dismissive?
Right. And there's a real risk of alienating the very person you're trying to attract.
Absolutely. And it makes you think, is the goal of these tactics to build a real connection, or is it just about winning some kind of social game?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that leads us to another concept from the audio, nested loops.
Right. These are essentially techniques for delaying gratification and building anticipation.
Okay, can you give me an example of that?
Sure. He talks about this "she wants to tell you something" loop, where you intentionally wait to hear something that she's really excited to share.
Oh, like to build the suspense.
Exactly. It creates this open loop that she'll want to close, so it makes her more invested in the interaction.
Clever. And what are some other examples of nested loops?
Well, he has all sorts of variations. He talks about the numerical loop, where you tease that you're going to reveal, say, 3 qualities you look for in a woman, but then refuse to share the third. Or there's the silent loop, where you just respond to a woman seeking validation with silence.
Oh, wow. Okay, so basically just making her work for your attention.
That's the idea.
But I gotta ask, doesn't that feel kind of manipulative? Like if you're always holding back and creating these artificial barriers,
Yeah.
is that really building a genuine connection?
Yeah, that's definitely a valid concern. Are these just playful flirting tactics, or are they edging into something more manipulative? And it only gets more provocative from here because the next thing he introduces is this idea of intentional undermining.
Oh, okay. I'm curious to hear about this one. Break it down for me. What is intentional undermining?
Well, Basically, it's saying or doing one thing and then immediately contradicting it.
Like a backhanded compliment.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
giving a compliment and then taking it back. He talks about creating uncertainty and keeping the other person off balance.
Okay, but give me a concrete example of what that would sound like.
Sure. One example he gives is telling a woman she has a great smile and then adding, actually, it's the fourth best smile I've seen tonight.
Oh.
Or like holding a door open for her and then saying, I only did it because I feel sorry for you.
That's brutal.
It's definitely a bold move.
So he's deliberately trying to be provocative.
Right. It's this constant push and pull, a deliberate subversion of expectations.
And his reasoning is that this creates that wanting, reaching, chasing dynamic.
Exactly. He wants to make the woman work for his approval.
But wouldn't that just push people away?
Well, that's what's so interesting. He claims that being unpredictable, even a little evil, makes him more intriguing, more of a challenge.
So like playing the bad boy role.
Exactly. And then he gets into the nonverbal side of things. He suggests adopting what he calls judge-like body language.
Like what kind of body language are we talking about here?
Think crossed arms, strong eye contact, standing at an angle.
Oh, so like projecting an air of authority.
Exactly. Like you're the one assessing rather than being assessed.
Interesting. And this ties into his concept of qualifying and challenging, which is essentially setting high standards and making the woman prove her worthiness.
Right. He's essentially setting up these hoops for her to jump through.
Doesn't that just come across as totally arrogant?
Well, he argues that it creates a sense of scarcity and makes him seem more valuable.
So it's like reversing the traditional dating script. Instead of him trying to impress her, she's trying to impress him.
Exactly. And he combines this with those nonverbal cues of authority to create a dynamic where she's compelled to seek his validation.
It makes you wonder, though, wouldn't this mainly attract women who are already insecure or looking for external validation?
It's a good point. It raises questions about what kind of foundation you're building a relationship on if it's based on this power imbalance.
Yeah, for sure. And then it gets even more intense when he brings up this guilty conscience push-pull technique.
Oh, yeah. This one is something else. He's talking about deliberately making a woman feel guilty for her actions or feelings.
Well, okay, give me an example, because that sounds pretty messed up.
So he has these different variations, like the guilty kiss, the guilty, even the guilty laugh.
The guilty kiss, what is that?
Okay, so picture this. He leans in as if he's going to kiss her, but then pulls back and says something like, I hope you weren't trying to kiss me. That would be incest.
Seriously?
Yep.
It feels like he's setting her up to feel rejected or embarrassed.
The question is, does that actually create genuine attraction or just fleeting intrigue?
That's a good question. And he doesn't stop there.
Yeah.
He mentions other variations like false hope, where he hints at being interested and then withdraws, and weakness and superiority, where he alternates between besting the woman and letting her win.
It's like he's created this whole arsenal of psychological tactics designed to keep her off balance and guessing.
It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. So what do you think so far? What stands out to you from all of this?
I think it's fascinating how calculated and strategic his approach is. It's clear he's put a lot of thought into this.
He has. And whether you agree with his methods or not, he's definitely providing a unique perspective on power and attraction.
Yeah, for sure. And even if we wouldn't use these tactics ourselves, I think it's important to be aware of them, because we've probably all been on the receiving end of some of this stuff, whether we realized it or not.
Absolutely. Having this awareness can help us all navigate these kinds of interactions with more understanding.
Right. And I think that's a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground already, and there's still plenty more to discuss.
We'll be back soon with more from this deep dive. It really is a lot. And it's interesting because he doesn't just talk about these techniques in the abstract. He also gets into some of the practical challenges guys face.
Oh, like what kind of challenges?
Well, things like actually getting a woman's real phone number.
Oh, right, because that's always a hurdle.
It is. And then there's the issue of what he calls flaking.
Right, like when you make plans and she just doesn't show up.
Exactly. And it seems like his go-to solution for both of these is, you guessed it, more nested loops.
Really? So even for these logistical things, he's still all about creating that anticipation and suspense.
Oh, yeah. He's big on planting seeds of anticipation for a future meeting, creating these open loops that she'll feel compelled to close.
Okay, I'm curious how that actually plays out in practice.
Yeah.
Give me an example.
Sure. So let's say you're talking to a woman and you discover a shared interest. Instead of diving right into a deep conversation about it, he might just mention it briefly and then say something like, we should talk about this more later. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts.
Oh, so like creating a reason to connect again in the future.
Exactly. Or he might suggest an activity that requires them to meet up. Like, I've been meaning to check out that new exhibit at the museum. We should go sometime.
Got it. So he's building momentum, giving her something to look forward to.
Exactly. But, of course, things don't always go according to plan.
Right? People cancel plans, things come up.
And he actually has a specific strategy for dealing with what he calls flaking.
I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Lay it on me.
He calls it the consequence. And basically it involves withdrawing contact to make the woman realize what she might be missing.
Oh, so like giving her a taste of her own medicine?
Kind of. It's about creating a sense of loss or scarcity. Like, hey, if you're not going to prioritize me, then I'm not going to chase after you.
I can see how that might be effective in some cases, but it also seems kind of risky.
It definitely is. It could totally backfire if the woman wasn't that invested to begin with.
Exactly. Then you've just pushed her away for good.
Right. And that's why I think it's always worth considering if there are more genuine and less manipulative ways to build connection and avoid these kinds of issues in the first place.
Agreed. Okay, so we've talked about framing nested loops, attraction coups, intentional undermining push and pull, and now even strategies for dealing with logistical challenges. Is there anything else?
Well, there's one more concept we haven't touched on yet, and this one is probably the most intriguing and potentially the most controversial.
Hit me with it.
He calls it dark side rapport.
Dark side rapport. Okay, that sounds intense. I'm intrigued. Break it down for me.
This is where he really gets into the idea of using tension and distance as tools to make a woman work harder for the connection.
Whoa. Okay, so like the opposite of trying to build rapport?
In a way, yeah. Instead of trying to create comfort and familiarity, he's suggesting you intentionally create a bit of friction.
That's fascinating. Can you give me a specific example of what that would look like?
Sure. One example he gives is pointing out a commonality and then immediately dismissing it.
Like how?
So let's say you find out you both grew up in the same town. Instead of bonding over that shared experience, he might say something like, oh yeah, that place. Total dump. Glad to be out of there.
Wow. Okay, so he's creating a disconnect instead of a connection.
Exactly. Or another example is revealing something intriguing about himself and then refusing to elaborate.
Okay, I got to hear this one. Give me the scenario.
So imagine he mentions that he's traveled all over the world. The woman naturally expresses interest, but instead of sharing stories and building on that connection, he just shuts down the conversation.
He just stonewalls her.
Pretty much. He might say something like, yeah, it was all right, or I don't really like to talk about it.
That's so strange. Why would he do that?
Well, his thinking seems to be that by making himself less available, he becomes more desirable.
It's like the classic treat 'em mean, keep 'em keen approach.
Yeah, kind of. But the question is, does that actually work? Can you really create a stronger bond by intentionally creating distance?
That is a good question. It seems counterintuitive.
It does, and psychologists have actually been debating this idea for years. There's definitely a risk that this approach could backfire and lead to resentment or the woman just losing interest completely.
Yeah, I can see that happening. So it seems like a pretty high-risk, high-reward strategy.
Definitely. It's important to weigh the potential downsides against any perceived benefits.
For sure. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. Framing nested loops, attraction coups, intentional undermining push and pull, dealing with logistical challenges, and now even this concept of dark side rapport.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. And I have to say, it's made me think differently about the dynamics of human interaction. Whether you agree with his speaker's methods or not, he's definitely offering a unique and thought-provoking perspective.
Absolutely. And regardless of whether you'd personally use any of these tactics, I think we can all benefit from understanding the psychology behind them.
Right. Even if you wouldn't use these techniques yourself, you probably experienced them at some point, whether you realized it or not.
Exactly. And having this awareness can help us all navigate these kinds of interactions with more understanding and discernment.
So as you think about everything we've discussed today, what stands out to you? What were the most memorable or thought-provoking concepts?
Have you ever encountered any of these tactics in your own life?
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking about one thing. We've been talking about all these techniques, the nested loops, the attraction coups, and everything else. But we've mainly been looking at it from the perspective of the guy using them. I'd love to shift gears for a minute and think about the other side of the equation.
The woman on the receiving end.
Exactly. So for everyone listening right now, I want you to imagine yourself in those situations. If someone were using these tactics on you, how would you feel?
Would you be flattered, intrigued, or would you maybe feel a little manipulated?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question to think about, because what one person might see as playful flirting, another person might see as disrespectful or even manipulative.
Exactly. And there's no right or wrong answer here. Everyone's going to react differently based on their own personality and experiences.
Right, but I think that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating. It really makes you think about communication and attraction and how differently people can perceive the same interaction.
It really highlights how communication is a two-way street.
Yeah.
What one person intends to communicate isn't always how it's received by the other person.
So as you go about your day, I encourage you to pay attention to the subtle ways people communicate. Notice those moments of push and pull, those attempts to frame the narrative, those little jokes that maybe have a hidden meaning.
You might be surprised by what you discover, both in how other people interact with you and in your own communication style.
At the end of the day, it's not about adopting or rejecting any specific tactics. It's about developing a deeper awareness of what's really going on in these interactions.
Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's what we're all about here, helping you understand the dynamics of human interaction so you can navigate your own life with more confidence and awareness.
Well said.
And on that note, we'll wrap things up for today. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll be back soon with more fascinating insights into the human experience.